Now, he's a very complex, involved person. I never get tired of him. He's got his own sense of humor. He's got his own way of thinking. He's not involved in the music business at all, but he loves music. And we're different, but yet we just are so compatible.
Dolly Parton died in Nashville on August 25th, 2026, at the age of 80, closing one of the most remarkable careers country music has produced. Behind the rhinestones sits a fortune estimated near $450 million, built from a theme park, a songwriting catalog, and decades of savvy business decisions. So who actually inherits all of it now that she is gone? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will understand how Dolly built her empire, what happens to it next, and why her family is grieving so much more than money. The rise of a Tennessee mountain girl, Dolly Rebecca Parton was born on January 19, 1946, in a one-room cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains of Sevier County, Tennessee, one of 12 children raised by parents who often could not afford new shoes, let alone luxuries. She grew up singing on the porch and in church, and by the time she was 10 years old, she was already appearing on local radio and television around Knoxville. The day after she graduated high school in 1964, she boarded a bus for Nashville with a suitcase and a stack of songs, determined to make a living from the only thing she ever really wanted to do. Can you imagine leaving everything you know behind at 18, with nothing but a guitar and a dream, and somehow turning that gamble into one of the biggest fortunes in entertainment history? That is essentially what happened. Parton signed with Monument Records, then spent years as a featured singer on The Porter Wagoner Show, before striking out on her own in 1974 with hits like Jolene and I Will Always Love You, songs that would eventually generate royalties for the rest of her life and long after it. Her songwriting alone became a financial engine most artists never come close to matching. She is credited with writing more than 3,000 songs over her career, and her publishing catalog was valued by Forbes at roughly $120 million on its own, a figure driven largely by I Will Always Love You, a song Whitney Houston later turned into one of the best-selling singles of all time. Parton famously turned down an offer from Elvis Presley's manager to record the song decades earlier because he wanted half the publishing rights, a decision that many industry insiders now consider one of the smartest financial calls ever made by a songwriter. Music was only the beginning, though. In 1986, Parton partnered with Herschend Family Entertainment to transform a modest Tennessee attraction into Dollywood, a theme park that now draws close to 3 million visitors every year to Pigeon Forge. Her ownership stake in that park, along with related resorts and water parks under the same corporate umbrella, became the single largest piece of her overall wealth, reportedly worth far more than her music rights combined. Beyond the park, she built out a business empire that included a dinner theater franchise, a stake in a Nashville hotel, clothing lines, cookware, a bakery, and eventually a partnership with Duncan Hines on a line of baking mixes that carried her name into grocery stores across the country. By the time of her death, various outlets placed her total net worth anywhere between $450 million and $650 million, with a widely cited breakdown crediting her sprawling brand empire alongside her enormous music catalog for most of that figure, as Yahoo Entertainment reported in its rundown of her holdings. Whatever the precise number, almost everyone agrees on one thing: Parton built her fortune the hard way through decades of relentless work rather than a single lucky break. Her wealth was never built on music alone, either. Parton crossed successfully into film and television starting in 1980 with 9 to 5, a comedy that became a massive box office hit and earned her an Academy Award nomination for the title song she wrote for it in a single afternoon. She followed that with more film roles through the decade, including Steel Magnolias in 1989, and later spent years developing television specials, a long-running variety show, and eventually a Netflix anthology series and an original stage musical built around her own catalog of songs. Each of those projects added another revenue stream on top of her music royalties and her stake in Dollywood, reinforcing just how many different directions her income actually came from by the time she reached her 80s. Her achievements outside the business world only added to that reputation. Over her career, Parton won multiple Grammy Awards, earned a Kennedy Center honor, received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and picked up a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, alongside dozens of other industry honors that placed her among the most decorated performers country music has ever produced. She was also famously generous with the wealth she earned. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, Parton donated $1 million toward vaccine research at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, a gift that helped fund work behind the Moderna vaccine, and years earlier, she had made a major donation to a children's hospital in East Tennessee that was later renamed in her honor. That pattern of giving away large sums almost as quickly as she earned them is part of why so many people close to her expect her estate to lean heavily toward charitable causes rather than private wealth. Of course, building a fortune is only half of the story. Knowing what happens to it after you are gone is an entirely different puzzle. And in Dolly's case, that puzzle is more complicated than almost anyone expected. After decades of business ventures, music royalties, real estate, and investments, the question of who ultimately inherits, manages, or benefits from that wealth raises some fascinating possibilities. We are about to break down exactly what her husband's own estate quietly set in motion years before her passing, and it changes how you should think about everything that comes next. Carl Dean's final gift and the quiet groundwork for what came next. To understand what might happen to Dolly's estate, you first have to understand what happened with her husband, Carl Thomas Dean, who died in March 2025 at the age of 82 after nearly 60 years of marriage. The couple met outside a Nashville laundromat on Dolly's very first day in the city. And unlike almost every other celebrity marriage of that length, Dean spent decades deliberately avoiding the spotlight, rarely appearing at premieres or award shows alongside his famous wife. When Dean passed away, reports later revealed that his own will, signed back in 2013, left his entire estate to a trust established in Parton's name, along with every personal item, title, right, vehicle, piece of jewelry, musical instrument, and entertainment-related interest he owned. Court filings behind the arrangement, which Stylecaster detailed shortly after Parton's own passing, brought new attention to the trust. Also showed he left a handwritten note naming specific nieces and nephews who would receive certain personal and household items, with Parton herself responsible for distributing anything not explicitly listed. That detail matters more than it might seem at first glance, because it shows Dean and Parton had already been thinking carefully about legacy and inheritance years before either of them died. Parton herself confirmed as much in a 2020 interview with Billboard, where she revealed that she and her longtime manager, Danny Nozell, had been working with an estate lawyer for years to get her affairs in order. She did not mince words about why. That same conversation resurfaced widely once news of her death broke, with News Nation pulling the interview into its coverage of what happens to her estate now, and in it Parton explained that she never wanted to leave a mess behind for her family to fight over, calling the process a genuine pain, but an essential one for any artist with real assets to protect. It is a strikingly practical mindset for someone so often associated with glitter and rhinestones, and it suggests that whatever her will ultimately says, it was not written in a rush or as an afterthought. Still, having a plan and having that plan become public are two very different things, and that gap is exactly where the uncertainty around her fortune begins. Dean's own death had already given the public a small window into how private the couple preferred to keep matters like this. When he passed away, Parton posted a short message thanking fans for their cards and flowers, rather than granting interviews about her grief, a gesture NBC News captured in full when it covered her tribute to her husband. She kept the details of Dean's funeral limited to immediate family, a pattern that suggests her own final arrangements and the will behind them are likely to stay just as guarded for as long as her representatives can manage it. Before we get into who might actually stand to inherit that fortune, you need to understand just how unusual her family situation makes this entire question. What normally simplifies an estate is missing here, and that changes everything. No children, no spouse, and a $450 million question mark. Here is where Dolly Parton's situation becomes genuinely unusual among wealthy celebrities. She and Carl Dean chose never to have children, a decision she spoke about openly for decades, once joking to Billboard that growing older without kids meant she and Carl never had anyone else to worry about. With Dean gone before her and no children of her own, Parton died without the two categories of heir that usually simplify an estate the most: a surviving spouse and direct descendants. That leaves an extended family that is enormous by most standards, but complicated in exactly the way that matters for inheritance law. Parton was one of 12 children herself, and by the time of her death she had 6 surviving siblings, along with a reported 14 nieces and nephews on her side of the family alone. Her nephew, Brian Seaver, who also served as her longtime head of security, stepped forward to announce her passing, a role that outlets covering her death confirmed she had personally asked him to take on years in advance, a detail Men's Journal traced back through her own family's account of the request. No verified copy of Parton's will had surfaced publicly in the immediate aftermath of her death, and her family made no statement about its specific contents. What analysts and entertainment reporters largely agree on, based on her own public comments over the years, is that a significant portion of her fortune is likely to flow toward the causes she cared about most, rather than sitting entirely with relatives. Her Imagination Library alone, the literacy nonprofit that mails free books to children from birth through age 5, has distributed well over 200 million books since it launched. And it stands as the kind of institution she repeatedly described as central to how she wanted to be remembered. There is also real uncertainty surrounding her business holdings. Specifically, her ownership stake in Dollywood exists within a corporate partnership structure alongside Herschend Family Entertainment, meaning that stake cannot simply pass to a family member the way a house or a bank account might. Reporting examining her most valuable assets in the days after her death, including an IB Times UK piece walking through why her heirs remain officially unconfirmed, pointed out that any transfer of her interest in the park, along with her music publishing rights, will likely depend on trusts, corporate agreements, or estate structures that have not yet been made public and may not be for some time. So while the headlines keep repeating the same $450 million figure, the honest truth is that nobody outside Parton's closest legal circle currently knows exactly how that number will be divided, and that uncertainty is precisely what makes the human side of this story so much harder for her family to process right now. Estimates of that figure also vary depending on which valuation method a given outlet trusts. Forbes has repeatedly placed her fortune closer to $450 million, largely from her stake in Dollywood and her publishing catalog, while other trackers have pushed the number as high as $650 million, once her real estate, brand licensing deals, and ongoing royalty streams are factored in. A Gap parade highlighted when it broke down her holdings shortly after her death was confirmed. Either figure would place her among the wealthiest performers of her generation, and either figure still leaves the same open question about who eventually controls it. None of that legal uncertainty comes close to explaining the actual tears being shed this week, though. To understand that part of the story, you have to look at how her family chose to announce her death in the first place. Tears, tributes, and a family left to carry the weight. Money aside, the raw grief surrounding Dolly Parton's death has been impossible to miss. Her family chose to announce her passing through a video message rather than a written statement delivered by Brian Seaver on behalf of what he described as both the Parton and Owens families. He explained that Dolly had asked him personally years earlier to be the one who would eventually deliver that news, a request he admitted he had imagined many times without ever truly feeling its weight until the moment finally arrived. In that same message, Seaver described being asked to carry an honor mixed with pride and heartbreak in equal measure. A momenttoday.com published in full alongside the rest of his statement to fans, and he made a point of reassuring fans that the sadness belonged to those left behind rather than to Dolly herself, saying she had been reunited with Carl, her parents, and other loved ones who had gone before her. It was a deeply personal statement from a man who had spent more than 2 decades protecting his aunt professionally, a role his own father held before him. The emotional weight did not stop with Seaver. Family members close to Parton have spoken for years about how tightly knit the Parton and Owens clan remained, even as Dolly's fame grew larger than almost anyone in country music history. She often told interviewers that several of her younger siblings lived with her and Carl for years at a stretch, and that closeness only deepened the sense of loss once her husband died first in 2025, followed by her own passing just 17 months later. Her sister, Stella Parton, who had already mourned Carl Dean's death and the death of their brother David the previous November, once again found herself speaking publicly about grief on behalf of the wider family, a burden that has now fallen on the Partons repeatedly in a remarkably short window of time. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment industry within hours of the announcement, with fellow musicians, actors, and even sitting politicians publicly honoring her legacy. Television networks quickly rearranged programming to make room for retrospectives, and CBS confirmed it would air a dedicated primetime special pulling from decades of archived interviews. A special Variety reported would draw on the network's own vast library of past sit-downs with Parton, while sister networks devoted entire blocks of airtime to her music videos. For a family already exhausted by back-to-back losses, watching that outpouring unfold in real time has been described by people close to them as both comforting and completely overwhelming. Fellow artists added their own voices to that outpouring almost immediately. Musicians who had worked alongside Parton for decades, as well as younger stars who grew up on her records, shared tributes describing her generosity toward other songwriters and her willingness to mentor performers who never even met her in person, a wave of reaction that CNN tracked as it updated its coverage throughout the day she died. For her family, watching people across every corner of the music industry mourn a woman they simply knew as an aunt and a sister added yet another layer to an already overwhelming week. What makes this moment different from a typical celebrity passing is the sheer scale of what her family now has to manage alongside their grief. A fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a theme park that employs thousands of people, a publishing catalog still generating royalties every single day, and a charitable foundation that touches millions of children's lives. Sorting through all of that would be complicated for any family. Doing it while still absorbing the loss of someone who was simultaneously a sister, an aunt, and one of the most beloved entertainers in American history is something else entirely. So while the exact terms of Dolly Parton's will may remain private for months or even years, one thing is already painfully clear. The number attached to her fortune tells only part of the story. The tears being shed by the people who actually knew her, the ones who called her sister, aunt, granny, and Gigi, long before the rest of the world called her a legend, tell the rest of it. Her music will keep playing, her theme park will keep welcoming visitors, and her imagination library will keep mailing books to children who never got the chance to meet her. But for the family she leaves behind, no amount of money will ever fill the space she occupied at their table. And that, more than any figure reported by Forbes, is the real weight of what Dolly Parton left behind. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, Do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.